You're in a conversation. Someone questions your decision. Maybe it's why you didn't come to the party, why you left that job, why you're doing things differently than everyone else expects. And immediately you feel it. That pressure to explain, to justify, to make them understand. So you start talking. You lay out your reasoning. You defend your choices. You try to make them see it from your perspective. And with every word, you lose power. Not because your reasons are bad, because the act of explaining itself signals that you need their approval, that their opinion matters enough to warrant a defense, that you're answerable to them. Machiavelli understood something most people never learn. The moment you explain yourself, you've already lost. This isn't about being mysterious for the sake of it. This isn't some shallow power game. This is about understanding a fundamental truth of human psychology. People don't respect what they can interrogate. They respect what they cannot control. And when you explain yourself, you're putting your decisions up for debate. You're inviting judgment. You're positioning yourself as someone who needs to be understood, rather than someone who simply acts. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must be like a lion and a fox. The lion to frighten wolves, the fox to recognize traps. When you explain yourself, you're neither. You're a domesticated animal performing tricks for approval. Let me show you why this destroys power and what to do instead. First, understand what explanation actually signals. On the surface, it seems reasonable. Someone asks why you did something, you tell them. That's just communication, right? Wrong. In power dynamics, explanation is submission. It's an acknowledgement that the other person has authority to question you, that they're in a position to judge your choices, that you owe them an account of your actions. Think about this. Does a king explain his decrees to peasants? Does a general explain strategy to foot soldiers? Does a CEO explain business decisions to entry-level employees? No. They announce, they command, they act. The people below them might speculate about reasons, but they don't get explanations. Not because these leaders are cruel or arrogant, because explanation would undermine the hierarchy that allows them to function. Now, you're not a king or a CEO. I get that. But the principle applies to every interaction where power matters, and power always matters. Whether it's with friends, family, romantic partners, or colleagues, there's always a dynamic. Someone's opinion carries more weight. Someone's choices are questioned more. Someone has to justify themselves and someone doesn't. The person who explains is always the one with less power. Machiavelli would say, this is because explanation reveals something crucial. It reveals that you're uncertain, that you need validation, that you care what they think enough to defend yourself. And the moment someone knows they can make you defend yourself, they have leverage over you. They can question you again and again. And every time you explain, you reinforce that they have the right to demand explanations. Let me give you a concrete example. Two men make the same decision. Let's say they both quit their corporate jobs to start businesses. Person A gets asked why. He launches into a detailed explanation. The pay wasn't good enough. The boss was terrible. The work wasn't fulfilling. He had this great business idea. He did the math, and it made sense. He goes on for 10 minutes, defending the decision. Person B gets the same question. He says it was time. That's it. No elaboration, no justification, just a statement of fact. Now, who seems more confident in their decision? Who seems like they might fail and who seems like they might succeed? Person B, every single time. Not because his reasons are better, because he didn't offer any. He acted like someone who makes decisions and moves on, not someone who makes decisions and then seeks approval for them. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote that it's better to be feared than loved. He wasn't advocating cruelty. He was observing that fear comes from unpredictability and power, while love comes from accessibility and vulnerability. When you explain yourself, you're being accessible, you're being vulnerable, you're showing your reasoning, which means people can find flaws in it. You're showing you care about their opinion, which means they can manipulate you with it. The person who doesn't explain remains unpredictable. You don't know their full reasoning. You can't argue with logic you don't have access to. You can't find weaknesses in thinking they haven't revealed. All you know is they decided something and they did it. That's power. That's what people respect even if they don't like it. Now let's talk about the specific ways explanation destroys power. First, it invites debate. The moment you lay out your reasoning, you've opened the door for someone to argue with it. Maybe your reason was valid to you, but now they can say, well, that doesn't make sense because of X, or have you considered Y, or I think you're wrong about Z. And now you're in a debate. You're defending your position. You're in a conversation where your decision is the subject being examined. Here's what Machiavelli would say about that. A prince doesn't debate with subjects. He decrees. Because the moment you're debating, you've acknowledged that the other person has standing to challenge you. You've made your decision contingent on winning an argument. And what happens if you lose the argument? You either have to admit you're wrong, which destroys your authority, or you have to maintain your decision while admitting your reasoning was flawed, which makes you look stubborn and illogical. Neither outcome serves you. The only winning move was to not enter the debate in the first place, and you enter the debate the moment you explain. Second way, explanation destroys power is it reveals your values and priorities. When you explain why you did something, you're showing what matters to you. And once someone knows what you value, they know how to manipulate you. Machiavelli wrote extensively about this. He said a prince should appear to have certain virtues, but shouldn't actually be bound by them, because people will use perceived virtues against you. Same thing here. If you explain that you quit your job because work-life balance matters to you, now everyone knows that framing something as threatening your work-life balance will get a reaction from you. If you explain that you ended a friendship because the person was disloyal, now everyone knows that questioning your loyalty will hurt you. You've handed them the blueprint to your psychology. The person who doesn't explain keeps that blueprint hidden. You don't know what motivates them. You don't know what they value. You don't know what buttons to push. They remain a closed system, unpredictable, unmanipulatable. That's power. Third, explanation makes you seem insecure, even if you're not, even if you're completely confident in your decision. The act of explaining signals doubt, because confident people don't explain. They just do. Think about the most powerful people you know or have observed. Do they explain themselves constantly, or do they state what they're doing and move forward? I'll tell you what happens when someone truly powerful makes a decision that seems strange. People speculate. They try to figure it out. They respect the decision because it came from someone who clearly didn't need their approval to make it. When you explain, you're showing you do need approval. You're showing that external validation matters to you. And people instinctively sense that as weakness. Machiavelli would say this is because humans are predators by nature. We look for weakness in others, not consciously necessarily, but we're always assessing who has power and who doesn't, who can be influenced and who can't. The person who explains is advertising their influenceability. They're saying, I care what you think. I need you to understand. I require your validation. And once you've shown that, people start testing boundaries. They question you more. They push harder. Because they've learned you'll explain, you'll defend, you'll care. And caring about someone's opinion is giving them power over you. Fourth, And this is subtle but crucial. Explanation dilutes your mystique. Machiavelli understood that part of power is theatre. Appearance matters. People respect what they find impressive, and they find mysterious things more impressive than fully explained things. When you explain everything, you remove mystery. You become ordinary. Your decisions become just another set of logical steps anyone could have taken. But when you don't explain, people fill in the gaps with assumptions that often make you seem more impressive than you are. They assume you have reasons you're not sharing. They assume there's depth to your thinking you're not revealing. They assume you're operating on a level they can't quite understand. Is this deceptive? Maybe. Is it effective? Absolutely. Now, I need to be clear about something. There are times when explanation is necessary and appropriate. If you owe someone an explanation because of a real obligation, professional responsibility, genuine harm you caused, that's different. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for being incomprehensible or refusing all communication. He was advocating for strategic control of information. The key is understanding the difference between explaining because you're required to and explaining because you feel pressured to, between providing information that serves a purpose and defending yourself because someone made you feel small. The first is sometimes necessary. The second is always destructive to your power. So what do you do instead? How do you handle situations where people expect explanations? Let me give you 5 Machiavellian alternatives that maintain your power. First, the minimal response. When someone asks why you did something, give the shortest true answer possible. Not a lie, not a deflection, just the most condensed version. Why did you leave that job? It wasn't working. Why didn't you come to the event? I couldn't make it. Why are you doing things differently? I prefer this way. Notice these answers are complete sentences. They're not rude. They're just minimal. They answer the question without opening the door for debate. There's no reasoning to argue with, no logic to pick apart, just a statement of fact. And if someone pushes for more, you simply repeat in slightly different words. It wasn't the right fit. I had other priorities. This works better for me. Machiavelli would call this the art of appearing open while revealing nothing. You've answered. You haven't been evasive or hostile. You've just chosen not to. Elaborate. And here's what's interesting. Most people won't push more than once or twice, because pushing for explanations from someone who isn't offering them makes them look desperate and nosy. So they back off, and you've maintained your power without creating conflict. Second technique, redirect the frame. Someone asks why you did something in a way that implies you need to justify it. Instead of accepting that frame and defending yourself, you shift the frame entirely. They ask, why would you quit a stable job? You respond, why would I stay somewhere that wasn't right? They ask, why are you being so secretive? You respond, why does it matter to you? This is classic Machiavellian fox behavior. You've recognized the trap. They're trying to put you in a position of defense. You've redirected, so now they're the one being questioned. You're not being aggressive. You're not being defensive. You're just reflecting the energy back. And suddenly, they're explaining themselves instead of demanding you explain yourself. Third technique, the authority statement. This is when you make it clear through tone and phrasing that the decision is final and not up for discussion. I've made my decision. This is what I'm doing. It's handled. These phrases signal that the time for input has passed if it ever existed. You're not asking for approval. You're not seeking consensus. You're informing. Machiavelli would say, this is exercising the lion aspect. There's no aggression in it, but there's unmistakable strength. You're not willing to debate. You're not interested in explaining. You've decided, and the matter is closed. Some people will be offended by this. Let them be. Their offense is them realizing they don't have the power over you they thought they had. That's not your problem. Fourth technique, the delayed non-answer. Someone pushes for an explanation. You say, "I'll think about how to explain this," or "Let me get back to you on that," and then you simply never do. This is a softer version of refusal. You haven't said no. You've just indefinitely postponed. And most people won't follow up because following up would make them seem overly invested in your business. Machiavelli used this tactic politically. He'd promise consideration without promising action. By the time people realized nothing was happening, the moment had passed and it was too late to push again. You can do the same in personal interactions. The non-answer that sounds like an answer. The postponement that becomes permanent. It's not dishonest. You did think about how to explain it. You decided not to. That's within your rights. Fifth technique, and this is advanced, the reframe through story. Someone asks for an explanation of your decision. Instead of explaining your reasoning, you tell a brief story about someone else who made a similar choice. A historical figure, a character from a book, someone you heard about. The story illustrates why the decision makes sense without you having to defend your personal reasoning. This is Machiavellian because you're controlling the narrative. You're providing context without providing vulnerability. You're showing that you're not alone in this type of decision without revealing your specific psychology. And people walk away feeling like they got an answer, even though you didn't actually explain yourself. They got a story. The story does the work of explanation without you having to defend your personal choices. Now let's talk about relationships specifically, because this is where people get confused. They think not explaining yourself means being closed off or emotionally unavailable. It doesn't. There's a huge difference between sharing your inner world with someone who's earned that intimacy and explaining yourself to someone who's challenging your authority. With a real partner, you do share reasoning, not to justify decisions, but to create intimacy and collaboration. You're not explaining because you have to. You're sharing because you choose to. The power dynamic there is different, but even in close relationships, there are times when explanation is destructive. If your partner questions every decision and you find yourself constantly explaining and defending, you're in a power imbalance. A healthy relationship doesn't require constant justification. Both people respect each other's autonomy enough that sometimes the answer is just, "Because I wanted to," and that's sufficient. If you're always explaining yourself even to people close to you, you're not in a partnership. You're in an interrogation. Machiavelli wrote that a prince should be loved if possible, but must be feared if love is insufficient. In relationships, this translates to be open and vulnerable when it's reciprocal and builds connection, but maintain boundaries when openness is being used to control you. If someone makes you feel like you owe them explanations for your choices as an autonomous adult, they're trying to control you. An explanation is the tool of that control. Here's what happens when you stop explaining yourself. At first, people are confused. They're used to being able to question you and get answers. When that stops, they push harder for a while. This is the testing phase. They're trying to re-establish the old dynamic. If you hold firm, they adapt. They stop asking. They accept that you're someone who makes decisions and doesn't justify them. And something interesting happens. They respect you more. Not consciously maybe, but they do. Because you've demonstrated that you don't need their approval. You've shown that your decisions are yours alone. You've positioned yourself as someone operating from internal authority rather than external validation. And humans, being the status-aware creatures we are, recognize that as power. Some people won't like it, especially people who benefited from you being someone who explained yourself. They'll call you closed off, secretive, arrogant. Let them. Their discomfort is them realizing they've lost leverage over you. That's a feature, not a bug. The people who actually respect you will appreciate the clarity. They'll know that when you share something, it's because you chose to, not because you had to. And that makes the sharing more valuable. Machiavelli would say, this is how you separate true allies from people who are just using access to control you. True allies don't need explanations for everything. They trust your judgment. They respect your autonomy. They're there to support, not to supervise. The people who get angry when you stop explaining yourself were never allies. They were managers who thought you reported to them. Here's the final thing I want you to understand. Not explaining yourself isn't about being cold or distant or playing power games for their own sake. It's about maintaining sovereignty over your own life. It's about recognizing that you're the ultimate authority on your own decisions. Not your family, not your friends, not your partner, you. When you explain yourself constantly, you're outsourcing authority. You're putting your choices up for committee review. You're living as if you need permission. And maybe you needed permission when you were a child. But you're not a child anymore. You're an adult who gets to make choices and live with the consequences without having to justify those choices to people who won't live those consequences for you. Machiavelli understood that power isn't about dominating others. It's about not being dominated. It's about maintaining autonomy in a world where everyone wants a say in how you live. And explanation is one of the primary tools through which people exert control over others. They make you feel like you owe them your reasoning, like your choices need their approval, like your life is subject to their review. It's not. Your life is yours. Your decisions are yours. Your reasoning is yours. You don't owe anyone access to your internal process unless you choose to give it. And giving it because you feel pressured, because someone made you feel small, because you're afraid of judgment, that's not choice. That's submission. Stop explaining yourself. Not out of arrogance, out of self-respect, not out of cruelty, out of boundaries, not out of secrecy, out of sovereignty. You're not answerable to the court of public opinion. You're not on trial every time you make a choice that someone else wouldn't make. Make your decisions, act on them. And when people question you, remember Machiavelli's rule. The moment you explain, you've already lost. Be the lion, be the fox, but never be the performing animal who needs applause to feel validated. The people who matter will respect you more. The people who don't matter will matter less. And you'll finally understand what it feels like to live with power over your own life instead of constantly auditioning for approval from others. That's Machiavelli's rule. Not explaining isn't withholding. It's sovereignty. And sovereignty is the only real power there is.